is going to be leading the session today, and she is CEO and co-founder of Scale Treasury Inc. And Jessica is a senior treasury and finance professional with over 13 years of experience helping businesses optimize liquidity, manage cash flow, raise capital, and drive financial efficiency. Jessica has led treasury and corporate finance strategies for top-tier banks and large corporations, negotiated complex financial deals, and enable companies to save and recover millions through strategic financial planning. Her expertise spans capital optimization, risk mitigation, investment strategy, execution, and financial structuring, all focused on helping businesses achieve their strategic goals. In addition to that, Jessica is a well-known Treasury thought leader. And if you're not connected with her on LinkedIn, I encourage everyone to connect because Jessica posts some excellent thought leadership. And you can tell that she has a real passion for Treasury and a real passion for sharing her knowledge with others in the industry. But before we get started here and turning it over to Jessica, I think we'll launch a poll here because we'd love to get a quick read of the room. And the poll is, which areas are you most focused on improving in your Treasury role right now? We'd love to just get a quick sample of that from the attendees and be able to read that back. So, Emily, feel free to pop that poll up. There we go. And let everybody give them a second. And Emily, whenever you want to display the responses, that would be great.
Wait, one more second here.
Okay. Oh, we have someone from Calgary, Canada, another
Yeah,
person.
yes,
Great.
great. Yeah, welcome.
All right, sharing results.
Oh, great results. Digital transformation and automation coming out on top here, followed by working capital optimization, executive visibility, and growth strategy. Surprising, the risk management's a little bit lower. That's kind of interesting to me. Jessica, any thoughts on the results of the poll question?
I think it was something I expected, right? In terms of like the focus on digital transformation with all of the, news and updates with all of the technological development happening currently, right? And then working capital optimization, of course, being able to shorten your cash conversion cycle. Yes, I'm really surprised on the risk management, but that also, ties to maybe FX risk, interest rate risk, and maybe how far people see the volatility that'll happen in the coming, period or coming economic cycles, right? I think maybe they feel the risk is quite low. That's why the focus might be on the digital transformation, which is currently happening, the trends happening, and then the working capital optimization. Then I like to see that treasury-led growth strategy is actually the third, right? And also executive visibility and influence. So yeah, perfect. Very, very apt for the session today. So yeah.
Well, fantastic. Thanks everyone for responding to the poll. Very, very interesting. So moving on to, I'm going to actually, from this point, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Jessica. She's the star today. And Jessica, please take it away.
Thank you so much for that intro and for the poll that was done. Thank you, Ed and team. Thank you for setting this up as well, right? Thank you for everyone who has joined us today. And I see all your messages in the chat. I see you're from Calgary, from NY and different areas in North America, right? So welcome, and thank you for creating the time to be here today. So what I want to do is, if you want to take out okay, let me close the poll so I can see my slides clearly. Perfect. So I just wanted to, so today's session, we're talking about strategic treasurer impact matrix, right? Which is the framework that helps you as a treasury professional to create and deliver value within your organization that then translates to impact and builds your influence within the organization, right? So that's the core focus. We're looking at this framework from these three pillars, right? And to start off, I just wanted to show you how I've been able to demonstrate this within my own experience as a treasury and finance professional, right? So talking about some of the achievements I was able to do, I'll just pick one example within when I worked as the head of treasury in an FMCG, right? Where I was able to optimize capital structure of the business and save the $1.2 million, right? And then I was able within my first 6 months to reduce finance costs by 40% and then to save tax of 450,000 for a pioneer status incentive, right? That we because we launched a new product line and all of that, right? And then even recovering excess bank charges of $700,000, as well as being the treasury business process owner for the implementation of an ERP, which we're mostly familiar with, right? SAP S/4HANA. But where we're coming from was like manual operations all the way to like trying to, achieve a higher level of operational efficiency by implementing this new ERP. We're literally going from Navision to SAP. I don't know how many people on here will know what Navision means, right? Or is actually, because it's an old ERP. Then also being able to achieve, centralization of collections and payment via API and suites, right? So these are some of the ways that I was able to demonstrate to create and deliver value within the organization. Of course, working with my team members, right? And then it made the organization give me 2 awards as for outstanding performance and as a professional achievers award, right? So these value created impacts that then built the influence and recognition from the executive level, because the group CEO, the chairman, the board got to know about the work I was doing and me being, enabling business growth and enabling the achievement of strategic goals and objectives, right? So this is just a high level demonstration based on my own experience. But let's just go on to what the data says, right? So the next slide, we'll look at the data based on the different reports by credible sources that we are very familiar with, right? So let's see what PwC has to say in terms of, so PwC's Global Treasury Survey, what it says about strategic influence of Treasury, right? We can see that the report concludes that 81% of CFOs say the Treasury function has become more strategic since the pandemic, right? Then looking at the second pillar for cash management and working capital optimization, what McKinsey & Company has to say, what they said in their working capital benchmarking report was that companies with optimized working capital outperform peers with 20% higher returns on invested capital, right? ROIC. Now, the third one, where it comes to, I saw that, based on the poll, it was treasury and digitization in treasury, right? Technology rather, and digitization in treasury. So we see that from the report done by AFP, right, in their treasury benchmarking report, that companies that automate treasury operations reduce operational costs by up to 25% and free up 30% of staff time. While the final pillar, which then shows how Treasury's role is in value creation and delivery, right? We see the report done by Deloitte saying that Treasury-led funding decisions saved Fortune 500 firms an average of $180 million annually in interest and fees. So we can see that this starts from credible sources, and we can see the conclusion saying that, all of the value created by Treasury, delivered by Treasury, can result in impact that saves both costs and also brings about efficiency gains. So we can see what the data says. So next, we're going to look at as a Treasury professional, right? So the next slide, we look at as a Treasury professional, what are your core strategic responsibilities? What are your core strategic mandates, right? So I explained this from a high level, and this is what has always guided me in my treasury and finance profession. So when I take on a new role or I come into an organization, I'm looking at things from a strategic perspective as to how my role, right, impacts or enables the business growth or enables the strategic goals of the organization. And let me categorize this for the strategic goals and objectives of an organization into 4 key areas based on, what we see generally. The first one is revenue generation. Every company, you're in business to make money. In short, the economic definition of a business is to make profits, right? So revenue generation is the top line, right? So we know profit is bottom line, but yeah, revenue generation. Then the second one is cost optimization. So they want to optimize cost. They want to bring minimum inputs to get maximum output in simple terms. Then the third thing organizations want to do is operational efficiency, right? They want to ensure they run their operations efficiently. So saving times to carry out tasks that needs to be done. Then the fourth one is market competitiveness. Every company wants to be competitive in the market because the larger the market share you acquire or you're able to capture, the more revenue it translates to for you, right? So that these are the key four strategic goals and objectives that we see that most organizations have, right? Now, let me bring it down to us as a treasury and finance professional as to what are our two key strategic goals within all of these of the organization's context, right? So the first is to ensure the company is solvent, right? So your role is to ensure your company is solvent. How do you achieve this, right? Four key ways that you can achieve it as a trade professional. The first is cash management. So under cash management, it comprises of cash flow forecasting, comprises of your liquidity planning, and then your scenario analysis. So you have to ensure that your forecast is more accurate, right, to a higher level. That's why for your operational day-to-day cash flow, your operational cash flow forecasting, the best one to use is your 13-week rolling cash flow forecast, because as you're able to update it as economic variable change, as market conditions change, and you're able to reflect a higher level of accuracy within all of that volatility, right, or dynamic, nature of the business environment. Then liquidity planning, we know liquidity risk is basically being able to ensure your company can meet long-term, short-term obligations as they fall due. So all of that, right? So planning the liquidity and timing of cash inflows and outflows, right? Managing the whole process. Then also scenario planning, yes. So base case, worst case, best case, testing, analysis, what if this happens, what would be the output? So all of those analysis, very critical. So these are the three key areas under your cash management, right? Now, the second one is working capital optimization. We saw that in the poll already, right? What does it simply mean? Shortening your cash conversion cycle. I think most of us are conversant with that already, right? So shortening your cash conversion cycle equates what? Collecting faster. So ensuring you monitor your DSO, right? Ideally, I don't think any company's DSO should be greater than 45 days, right? You need to collect faster, so make sure your max is 45, whatever credit term you have to give, but it doesn't exceed 45 days. Then for your DIO, right, you want to turn over your inventory faster. You want to ensure that you're selling faster and then you're converting your cash faster for the business. Then, of course, which is the payables, the DPO, to say, okay, how can we extend so that we can have internal cash flow or internal liquidity to meet other operational needs within the business, right? So you want to extend it beyond 45 days, right? To as long as you can get, as long as the supplier is happy with the terms, right? Then looking at funding decisions. So funding and decision and investment decision will be an output of two key of your cash flow forecast, really. And then when you're doing your cash flow forecast, we already know the basics of your cash flow forecasting, right? Under your operating, investing, financing, right? But then the only two key outcomes you can get from your cash flow forecast, which is your deficit or your surplus. So if you have a deficit, that's when you have to make a funding decision, right? And when you're making your funding decision, you are influenced by two key factors. The first is the cost, the interest, because the cost of borrowing, right? You want to ensure you negotiate the most appropriate cost pricing, right? Then in terms of the tenor, so you also want to ensure that when you're making a funding decision, you're matching the profile with that need, the maturity profile with that need. Let me break it down such that if you're funding working capital requirements, you're trying to pay your suppliers, you don't have more money to pay your suppliers, you have to focus on using revolving facilities like maybe overdrafts, credit lines. It depends on how these loans are being called in your own geographical region, wherever you're located, right? But credit lines, overdraft, anything that's revolving so that it swings, you can pay back, you can draw again, and all of those things, right? But then if you're funding CAPEX, which are capital expenditures, you can use an OD, right? Because there's a payback period for which that investment will start yielding cash or paying cash flowing, bringing cash into the business, right? So you have to ensure that when you're making funding decisions, you use the same loans that are tenored or matched to when you expect to get the cash from the investment. So if your company is buying an equipment, right, and the payback period has been computed, say 18 months, right? You want to ensure that you're taking, if possible, a 2-year loan, right, a 24-month loan, so that by the time the cash flow is coming in, you already have the money to pay back on that asset. You don't want to use an overdraft or a revolving line to fund a CAPEX because the repayment is so short before you start getting the cash flow from the capital expenditure, right? So this maturity profiling, I often see a mismatch, and that affects the capital structure of the business eventually in the long term. So you want to avoid any mismatch within your funding decisions, right? Now, the other one or the final one under ensuring company solvency is investment decisions. You want to make sure, of course, the second outcome of your cash flow forecast is surplus. So if you have a surplus, then you need to place funds, right? Because there's an opportunity cost of putting your funds in like a non-earning account, maybe current account, right? So you have to either, when you're making an investment decision, the two factors that influence it is the yield on the financial assets you're trying to invest in, and then the tenor that you should invest that money for. So in determining the yield, that is quite easy because if you look, depending on the risk appetite of your organization and what your risk policy is, right? You know what financial assets to invest in, whether you use low risk, medium risk, or high risk. But then, I mean, the most common ones are like mutual funds, treasury bills, bonds, CPs, or all of that, right? So the whatever yield is tied to whatever financial asset. But then in terms of tenor, that's where I want to emphasize, because when you're making investment decisions, you have to consider your future liquidity requirements that you have already put in your cash flow forecast. You don't want to place funds for 180 days when you have a capex investment to make in 120 days, right? Then you'll be running around to see how can you pre-liquidate the asset, which might come with added costs to the business and all of that. You don't need all of that. So make sure you match your investment tenor to your future liquidity requirements so that you know you can still have the cash to be able to meet obligations, future obligations as they fall due or as they need to be paid on, right? So that's that on ensuring the company's solvency. So going to contributing to the company's profitability, here we're going to look at just two key things, right? So your bank relationship management, which involves like your transactional fees, all the fees that banks, like you have to pay the banks, whether it's on transactions, whether it's on, or leveraging maybe like technology, so fintech solutions, for example, right? Because we know there are a lot of solutions, treasury efficiency solutions and all of those things that you can get, right? But there's some that your bank can help you with just by way of having a relationship with them, right? So make sure you leverage, they give you the RFP and you can leverage all of the solutions that it can help you achieve some collections efficiency, payments, and all of that route, right? And then you negotiate transaction fees. I always say that I don't think there's any fee or any cost at the bank that we have to pay the bank that is not negotiable, right? So I always negotiate every single thing with the bank, right? And that was how I'm always able to save some cost for the business, right? Then the second under the so the second objective of contribute, I'll say either contribute or protect, right? So more of protect the company's profitability. And that's what we're going to with your second function as a treasury professional, which is financial risk management. We know all the financial risk that the business is prone to. I'll just say some of them, like the major ones are when it comes to market risk. So under market risk, we have liquidity risk. No, under market risk, rather, we have interest rate risk, we have your FX risk, and we have your commodity price risk. Those are your three key market risk categories, right? We know the impact all of this can have. We know the hedging tools for your FX, right? So your forwards, options, swaps, all of that, you leverage it. When you analyze your foreign currency exposure portfolio, you then know if it is a receivable, you're hedging, if it's a payable, you're hedging, and based on the circumstance, you know which hedging toolkit is good for you, for your company at that point in time, right? It's on a case-by-case basis. We use layered hedging strategy. It depends on what you're able to, right? And then for your interest rate risk, there are also hedging tools that you can use as well to mitigate interest rate risk, and then commodity price risk. Then the second risk under financial risk is your liquidity risk, which basically means the ability of the company to meet short-term obligation as they fall due, right? The adverse effect of them not meeting is when the risk crystallizes, right? So you have to ensure with your cash flow forecasting, that's your 13-week rolling forecast, which covers 1/4 of your financial year. You can use that to be able to manage that risk, right? And reduce it, because I often say that you cannot completely eliminate risk. You can only reduce it. So what you want to do is reduce the risk by protecting your company's profitability. Then some other risks like counterparty risk and other risk, right? You have to be very conversant of. And in recent times, because of the advent and development of technology, you might then want to look at cyber risks to say, okay, IT, how are we protecting our financial systems, access, MFAs, and all of those things, right? How are we protecting? So you might want to know to an extent what's happening within the cyber, because I've had cases of big organizations that we know, very popular ones, who their systems have been taken over by like hackers and the rest, right? And they have to pay large sums of money. So you want to still just have an eye on cyber risk, but that's not your core function, right? But then looking at, so I hope we have a high level view of the strategic responsibilities of a treasurer within all of this context that I've explained. I wanted to give you a high level because it's not just about the operational, operational work and doing all of the things or checking my cash position, but it's when you understand from this context, you can then see how these operations help to, drive the achievement of the strategic goals and help you, once you execute your strategic goals, you're enabling the business growth. We'll look at a case study of how Treasury enabled business growth. That's an expansion plan by an organization in 3 key ways, right? But before we go to that case study that puts like a practical context to what I've explained right here, we're going to look at the strategic impact matrix, the matrix itself, the 4 quadrants. So that's the next slide. We'll look at the 4 quadrants and you can then be able to assess somehow based on what I've said, where your treasury is at the moment, right? Before we then look at the Excel template that then breaks this line by line so that you can actually assess yourself to say, where am I? What quadrant do I want to move to next? And how can I really, really enable business growth as a treasury and finance professional, or even as your treasury department in itself, if you're the head of the department, right? So looking at these quadrants, it's basically categorized or weighed based on influence and impact, right? So looking at the first quadrant, which is the silent strategist, here Treasury enables value, quite all right, but they are not at the strategy table, right? So here, the risk here is that they're under-recognized. They're doing a whole lot of value, right? Creating and delivering value that impacts the organization, but they're not recognized for it, right? Now, the next thing you need to do is build influence through data, right, foresight and partnerships. You have to collaborate with cross-functional department. Let them know, let the organization, let people in the organization know what you're doing, right? Acting as a business advisor, being part of, in the meetings with cross other functions and providing some advisory roles and letting them see the value that you create. So you need to build influence, right, within the organization because you are already creating and delivering value that's probably translated to impact of either efficiency gains or cost savings for the business. Then the next one is, we'll just go down to transactional executor before we go to the ideal, which is the strategic enabler, right? So for transactional executor, here your treasury department is performing tasks like payments, cash ops, regular cash operations and management, compliance and all other treasury operational areas, right? But the risk is that you're viewed as a cost center. So what you need to do is you need to digitize, you need to automate, right? And you need to elevate insight. So you need to make more presentations to, I don't know, maybe executive management or the CFO of what Treasury is currently doing, right? So as you make more presentations, they begin to see the value you're creating, and then you need to automate and digitize. So you make your operations more efficient, right? Then we'll go to emerging influencer, where the Treasury has the vision, right? But they're not yet embedded in the enterprise planning. And then what you need to do next is you need to align with the CFO and the CEO's agenda and lead more strategic initiatives. Sometimes some of these strategic initiatives might not be like treasury and finance focus. It might be an up from the organizational perspective, but you can be a project, what we call a project or a process owner to ensure that at least you're taking up some roles, to also enable or make sure that that project is actually implemented based on the requirements or the business case that was used to document it. And then the ideal one, which is the 4th quadrant, is the strategic enabler. Here, Treasury shapes decisions and drives growth. Treasury also influences enterprise-wide strategy, right? And the focus is just to transform Treasury into a value-generating command center because you're already a strategic enabler, right? You just need to do more of what you're doing and then improve on that. So these 4 quadrants will be broken into, so we'll go to the Excel template that shows the line item based on all of the dimensions, right? And the key tasks that you need to do to rate yourself as a treasury business owner. So at this point in time, we'll go to the Excel template, right? And then we can see once you're able to I think the Treasury 4 team should be able to make this template. Maybe this template will be emailed after the webinar, this session, so you can assess yourself exactly. So once you assess yourself, you know exactly what quadrants that you fall in. Now, looking at, I hope everyone can see the Excel templates. Remember, if you have questions, you can drop it in the chat and we'll attend to it after the session, right? So in terms of dimension, we're looking at strategic influence, right? Category then has to do with maybe executive alignment and governance. planning and allocation, business partnering, insights and storytelling. Then to even talk about storytelling is how you communicate insight is very important because there's something called financial language and there's something called business language. And your CEO, your COO, the CMO, which is the chief marketing officer, even the board and investors, they all speak business language. They don't speak, we have treasury and finance professionals. We sometimes think in numbers and we speak numbers, right? It's fantastic for us when we do an analysis, you think in numbers, you can't quantify anything, right? But these people, what they understand is business language. Some of them are non-finance professionals. So how you communicate to them will determine if your information, what you're saying, will be meaningful to them and it will be the appropriate insights that they can use to either make the decision that drives the business forward or take the relevant action they need to take. So you want to say things like, you can say, okay, liquidity ratio is 0.9, right? But instead you say, okay, we have sufficient liquidity to be able to meet this obligation or to do this particular thing. That's more business language rather than speaking the financial metrics, right? Just to give a high level simple example there, but going really into the template, right? So based on executive alignment and governance, right? So looking at an assessment item here, which is Treasury objectives are explicitly aligned to CFO/CEO agenda and reviewed quarterly, right? Then you score yourself. So if we go towards the right, we will see the way, first of all, right, how you can weigh, then you're scoring on a scale of 1 to 5, right? So you see how to score yourself. Towards the right, you have about maybe 4 columns that shows you how you can then score yourself. On a scale of 1 to 5, you can say, okay, where am I here? 3 will be in midpoint, 1 will be like low, and then 5 will be like the maximum, right? So you can just assess yourself honestly and be able to weigh yourself. So if you want to move to the right hand side quickly, Emily, so people can actually see exactly. So the score, then so the score against the target, then is to calculate what your gap is because it's to measure what you scored yourself versus the targets, right? You set for yourself, where your gap is and all of those things. So then if we go back to the left, let's look at other dimensions and categories. So you can do this after the expert session precisely. So looking at all of this, for planning and allocation, so Treasury shapes strategic planning, capital allocation, and M&A financing decisions, all of that, you can rate yourself and assess yourself using all of these templates. Then if we go to the summary sheet, the summary sheet will then show you what exactly, so it will tell you where you are in terms of your strategic influence and your enterprise impact. It will rate you based on those numbers there, then you see exactly where you are in the quadrant. So look at the quadrant on my row 6, you would see this because of the low, because we had not completed everything. So you had a low score, which is transactional executor, right? So transactional executor is the cost center. So you're basically just doing the operational activity without the strategic insight, right? So you might want to then transit to the next quadrant, right? So this will just already measure you based on how you rated yourself in the assessment sheet. And then then your top 5 ranking priority action that you need to take will be listed here based on where you ranked the low. This will automatically populated, right? Your assessment item categories, we pick the top 5 where you rank the lowest, and then that's where these are the 5 ones you need to focus on improving on so that you can transit to the next part of the matrix and position yourself to really create and deliver value that will generate some form of impact and build your influence within your organization. So the next thing we're going to go to will be, so let's go to the matrix sheet as well so that people can see at a glance what that looks like. So at a glance, you then see exactly your strategic influence, enterprise impact and all of that. The threshold is 3 here because for your x-axis, the midpoint is 3. So anyone below 3 where you rank is low, right? Anyone above 3 is high, right? So that's how the red line demarcates for the y-axis, while the x-axis is the green line. Above 3 and below 3 as well is the same logic behind it. So you see all of that will be populated and then you can see your dimension and where you rank, right, within the x and the y-axis. So at this point, let's go into the practical aspect that then shows how the treasury of an organization, position itself as a business enabler driving growth. So we'll look at a case study next, right, to say, okay, the business had a growth plan, an expansion plan that it wanted to achieve, right? And then Sometimes in some organization, I'll say I saw this mostly in the past where, oh, the business has gone ahead. They've done maybe FP&As, we've done the analysis, the MPV of the investment and all other analysis they need to do to see, okay, will this investment give us a return, right? The ROI, all of those analysis that needs to be done. And then they'll come to Treasury as an output of all of the analysis and say, okay, can you provide the funding to fund this, right? Which shouldn't be. Treasury should be brought in at the beginning of the conversation so that Treasury can advise through the process and get the effective funding, be able to mitigate whatever risk, and then probably be able to optimize working capital, like in the new region and all of that. So for the next sheet now, I think the next sheet just contains the executive summary that gives us a context to the case study. So let's go to the second sheet now. Right. So giving us a company overview so we understand the context of the organization as to it was a beverage manufacturing company, right, located in Calgary with annual turnover of $67 million. And their core market was actually Canada, where 72%, of course, they had 70% market share, right, of Canada, and then 48% in Eastern Canada, right? So in terms of the strategic objective that they wanted to achieve at this point in time, they wanted to enter the US market with a $7.5 million, market entry investment and targets 3 key states, which was Washington, Oregon, and California. So this just gave me a practical, hypothetical context as to how Treasury can enable business growth. In this case, it was an expansion plan, right, into a new region. So looking at the strategic imperative for all of this, right, the CEO, right, really wanted to capture the US West Coast, demand for health conscious beverages and leverage proximity for supply chain efficiency. The CFO had his own concern, which of course is to protect liquidity to ensure that there was a balance, there was a health, right? The balance sheet was healthy and the risk associated with this expansion was mitigated and all of that, noting that there was a lot of, the environment was high cost, right, in itself. So what Treasury had to do was they had to really move from just focusing on the transactional tax to really seeing how they could position themselves as strategic business enablers, right? So going to the next page where we then see how the Treasury really execute this expansion plan and how do they enable, let me put it that way, how do they enable? So what they did was to get the appropriate funding mix using 4 key areas, right? So 4 key sources rather of funds, which was internal cash reserves, supply chain financing, vendor financing, and then bank loan. In this context, we look at it as so for the internal cash reserve, they're able to get like 2.75 million, which of course, looking at the percentage of the total requirements, right, for the investment amount, and then looking at supply chain financing, SCF, they were able to get was $2 million, while vendor financing was 1.26, right? Which was, so the vendor financing was the extension of the AP, right, from 30 to 90 days, which provided more, internal liquidity to them meet all other requirements, operational requirements. And then of course, bank term loan, because it is a CAPEX, so it was a term loan, not a revolving facility, so a facility that was due within a particular. So in this instance, they were able to structure a 2-year bullet repayment, right, at a fixed rate, at the rate of like 4.2%, right? So yeah, that provided 20% of the liquidity pool that they needed for the entire 7.5 million investment amount, right? So going on to the next sheet, which is just to focus on how the transaction on a high level. So I think the other thing, yeah, they were able to do as well, apart from this funding mix from the 4 liquidity sources, also they did appropriate cash flow forecast as well. Considering the US expansion model, right, we then helped them. So they did the analysis based on base case, best case, worst case, and we're able to see the impact on the revenue run rates, right, by month 12, like the DSO assumptions and all of those liquidity impact for the business as well. Then to go on to the next slide to say the third thing that he did was FX risk management. Exactly. So of course, because we know that the CAD is a weaker currency when you're comparing against the US, right? So there was already an associated risk that the business was exposed to. So they were able to mitigate the risk with forwards contracts, natural hedging. Of course, they did appropriate stress testing, and looking at the outcome is right. Operating margin were maintained within the plus or minus 1.5 across all modeled FX scenarios, right? In doing all of this analysis from this FX perspective, it then helped them to mitigate to reduce the risk, right? Because they were able to then hedge 50% of the USD denominated expenses with a rolling 3-month tenor. And then for natural hedging, that's just pretty about matching, right? So matching inflows to outflows. So they were able to do all of those things to offset USD outflows with USD inflows, right? And then this scenario testing, which was the stress testing that modeled 10% of USD appreciation impact, right? And the margin compressed by only 1.3%. So all of this analysis, all of these outputs were as a result of the analysis that was done with regards to FX risk management, right? So as we go down to the end of the case study, it's just on a high level to give you the 3 ways in which Treasury was able to enable this growth initiative, right? So funding, right, from the appropriate liquidity, diversified liquidity sources, the 4 diversified liquidity sources, then also using the cash flow forecast and then mitigating the associated risk that the what's called company was exposed to by way of this transaction. So the key lessons and insights is just to learn that, liquidity preservation is really, really very important for every organization. And then FX flexibility outperforms over hedging. And you need to be able to phase your market entry to be able to reduce risk and then also leverage vendor and supply chain financing where applicable, right? So these are the ways Treasury was able to achieve this, and you can also explore these ways and even other. There's so many ways to achieve it. But the core focus for this session is to ensure that you position yourself more to create and deliver value within your organization that will result in an impact, either efficiency gains, cost savings, right? And then to be able to build influence. So the first 2 pillars would definitely lead to you getting more influence with executive management within your organization. So at this point, I would just stop talking now so that you can ask your questions and let me know if, whatever comments or insights you really gain from the entire session here. So.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. You covered a lot of ground there in the last 40 minutes or so. So thank you. Love to get some questions from the attendees. If you want to put them any questions in the Q&A box, I'm happy to read them out, and Jessica can respond. I'm happy to respond as well. So don't be shy.
You can also tell us your experience of how you actually enable business growth as well, and what you think about the assessments. They should be able to get the templates, right, for the Excel templates to be able to assess themselves as well, right? Okay.
Yeah,
great.
We can distribute those after the call. We'll send those out via email. Thank you, Jessica. I mean, it's very clear that that assessment model is fantastic. You put a lot of thought and energy and effort into building that, and really helping better the Treasury practitioner community by sharing that. So thank you.
It's a pleasure to.
Right. Any questions?
I think one of them that came through that I'm looking at is, what advice would you give an analyst looking to grow their career with a small team? I feel like I'm more strategic than just working deliverables and how to position this with my manager. It's probably referencing your matrix.
Yes, exactly. So that person will be, so from what I hear you say, maybe persons at the transactional operational level and maybe feels that they are confined or compelled by their role to stay at that level, right, as a treasury analyst. But what I will advise you to do is just attend, if you're able to attend more of those strategic meetings, right? It could be the meeting with the CFO, because I'm sure your head of treasury, I don't know how you call, maybe your treasury manager, your group treasurer, or the head of treasury will be having meetings or sessions that they'll be reporting to the CFO. So you might want to attend those meetings. And of course, you have to understand your organization's, strategic goals and objectives for that financial year, so that before you attend the meetings, you have done some research on how you can add value. And you could just start with you making contributions within the meeting to say, oh, from all that they're conversing or talking about, right? You could just make a very, very, very valuable contribution to add to what they're talking about, or because I'm sure you'll be part of putting the reports together that will be presented. But even being present in the meeting can start with you building that visibility. You get more understanding of the strategic direction for your company, and you can also make insights. It's from those valuable contributions you make that then they begin to see how you can actually do more for the organization, because it starts with you understanding and aligning to where the organization is going from a strategic level. And then when they see that your contributions are valuable, they then begin to say, okay, maybe you can take up more responsibilities, more roles, and then that's where the opportunities for promotion will come in, right? And your value will be really seen. So you can start from that point with attending those key meetings and making valuable contributions. Yeah.
Jessica, what are some of the external sources that you go to for education in terms of Treasury? Are there any, other thought leaders or sites that you follow to expand your knowledge?
Yes, I do. I mean, of course, the first is because I'm a CTP, so the first is the AFP, right? So yeah, and then some of the consulting, what's it called? Like some of those I quoted in my second slide, right? So PwC resources, McKinsey, right? And then, but most importantly, AFP and yeah, a couple of other ones as well, right? So yeah, and yeah, my wealth of knowledge from my experience as well. So all of that together.
Well, great. Thank you, everyone, for attending here. Jessica, any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
I think I've covered everything for today. I just hope that people will be able to take the required action to, first of all, assess themselves and see how they can create and deliver more value within the organization. Because what we want to do, or what we try to do in moving or advancing the profession, is for the individuals themselves or professionals to be more valuable within the organization, so that the value of the treasury profession will keep being, seen within the organizational context and even globally on the larger landscape here.
Great. Well, I encourage everybody on the call today to connect with Jessica on LinkedIn, follow her LinkedIn page for Scale Treasury. And Jessica, thank you for all your contributions to the practitioners, the people who are looking to expand their knowledge. Your thought leadership is absolutely tremendous, and it comes from the heart and your passion. So really, thank you for that. And I encourage everyone to connect as well. And if there's anything that we can be helpful with, please reach out. We'll be sharing the webinar link after this, and along with the assessment matrix that Jessica was walking us through. So thank you, everyone, for attending. We hope you found this valuable and a good use of your time. And you'll also be, if you've asked for the CTP credits, you'll be receiving that as well. Christina or Emily, any kind of wrap up
Yeah.
here?
Yeah, I see actually one more question here from an
Oh, okay.
attendee. What do you
Okay.
think sets Treasury 4 apart from other competitors in the market?
I think
Oh,
I think that, okay, yeah. It goes to Treasury 4 team, right?
you can actually take that, Jessica. I'd let you take it. If you have any thoughts you want to share about Treasury 4, and then I'm happy to
Yes.
add on to that.
Yes. So, I mean, based on what I know about Treasury 4 and even the few demo about the platform, right? So, what I love about it, I love their entity, their cash flow entity, and the cash flow module rather. So, the cash
Mhm.
module, cash management module, and then the entity management module, especially when you're working in a multinational, right? So, you want to help you to put everything into an organized and order and manage everything from a comprehensive standpoint, right? So, I really, really do recommend Treasury 4's TRMS, because it's really functional and it actually solves the problem that treasury professionals have. Not just saying, okay, I want to implement a TRMS just for its own sake. It will actually give you that efficiency gain that you need, right? And then the cost reduction or the cost optimization goals that you want to achieve as well. So yeah, it's a good one.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. I'll just thank you. That was great. I'll add a few things. We are practitioner-led and practitioner-built. Mike's experience is over 20 years as a treasury practitioner, having been at Microsoft, Itron, Tableau Software, and Salesforce. Last week, we announced the acquisition of Treasury Go, and their president, George Zinn, is joining Treasury 4 as our Chief Strategy Officer. George served as Microsoft's treasurer for 17 years. the longest serving treasurer at Microsoft, so deep experience in global multinational complex treasury issues. As Jessica mentioned, our Entity 4 module, we are built on a foundation of legal entity and financial account management. And that module is meant for not just treasury, but tax, corporate legal, controllership, internal audit, really as a central record for all of that data and documents. And then I think the other key thing for Treasury 4 is that we're a data platform. We bring in expansive data across the ecosystem, not just bank statements and payment processing, but investment data, investment custody, investment accounting, merchant processing, bank fee analytics, ERP data. So we're always expanding our data footprint. And all of that data is available for reporting, analytics, dashboard development for our users. And so really, at the end of the day, we are a data platform. All right. Well, that's been a great session. Thank you for the questions. Anybody that wants any follow-up, please reach out. And Jessica, again, thank you for sharing your time and expertise and knowledge today. We really appreciate it.
Yes,
It was a
thank you,
pleasure
Jessica.
too. Thank you too. I see the comments in the chat. Thank you all. Thank you, Treasury 4. And connect with me on LinkedIn. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.